Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. Thanks for joining us in this hybrid event, which is organized as part of the International Forum on Energy for Sustainable Development. This event actually is an expert group meeting where we try to dive in on issues related to the role of the blockchain in the energy transition, more specifically for the Arab region, and how this could enable the just energy transition. This event would be joined by the speakers, eminent speakers from all over the world, and I will have the honor to moderate the panel discussion that will involve all of them in that. And this webinar obviously will be using Zoom, and it will be for 90 minutes. We will have a keynote presentation as just setting the scene of the session, and we will have a presentation from three case studies and organizations and aspects, and then we will follow by panel discussion, for which will join us two discussants from the Arab region. Just for some housekeeping. So using the Zoom, I would like to invite all the participants when whatever they have questions to drop their question on the chat box, and we will be undertaking the question after the panel discussion. In addition, that I will ask also the speakers to keep muted and their video off, and they just to turn them on and also unmute themselves, and also display their presentation when they are given the floor to speak. When we start the panel discussion, I also ask the speakers, if they can, the panelists, also to turn on the videos and unmute themselves when they have the role to speak. Thank you very much for all those who are joining us today. And just as a reminder, why we have this session, basically, as I indicated, the role of blockchain, but more importantly, that we at the Regional Commission of Western Asia, which has in its portfolio as a think tank organization, the Arab countries, as you know, for most of you know that we have really a diverse countries in this region between oil and gas producers and consumers, but all of them face different challenges, and they have different vulnerabilities, obviously, to address the challenges for the energy transition. And most of them are related whether to the need for the capacity building, the access to finance, but as of today, the access to technology and the awareness to that. And among them, how the blockchain can help in order to enhance and support the energy transition and the uptake of renewable energy. Without further ado, allow me to give the floor to my colleague, Sean Ratika, who's been working on this topic since he was at ERENA, and he will set the scene for today's presentation and session. Sean, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Radia, and thank you to our experts and audience for joining us. Blockchain continues to be a hot topic, and it's events like this that help us to stay at the forefront of innovation to better support our member states in the Arab region. Today's expert group meeting aims to answer a central question: how blockchain technology can enable and accelerate the sustainable energy transition in the Arab region. Firstly, what can we learn from what's happening in the space globally to increase energy sustainability and access to modern energy services? Previous slide, please. What are the barriers seen around the world, and what are the barriers in the region? And lastly, how have these barriers been overcome globally, and can the same strategies work here? So as Radia mentioned, insights from today's event will be integrated into a report on the role of blockchain in the Arab sustainable energy transition. And we encourage all of today's experts to share with us case studies to be incorporated. And if anyone in the audience has insights to share, please send those through after the event. Next slide, please. So for the next 5 minutes, I'll present a short scene setter and give just a bit of background on blockchain and the regional context, since our audience is logging in from around the world and may not be familiar with the technology or the Arab region. So what is blockchain essentially, and what can it do? In a nutshell, Blockchains are immutable digital ledgers that can be used to securely record all transactions taking place on a given network. So once the data is sealed within a block, it cannot be changed retroactively. This includes not only financial transaction data, but almost anything of value. So the technology is enabling a new world of decentralized communication and coordination by building the infrastructure to allow peers to safely, cheaply, and quickly connect with each other without a centralized intermediary. So contrary to popular misconception, blockchain is not just cryptocurrency. It's a mechanism that can be implemented by many industries to enable efficient transactions, optimize workflows, streamline multi-party processes, boost accountability while minimizing disputes, and open up new markets through asset tokenization. So blockchain, in effect, changes the way we transact, with the underlying transaction model shifting away from a centralized structure towards a decentralized system. Third-party intermediaries whose services are needed today in most industries may no longer be required in such systems. So this can cut costs and speed up processes. It's important to note, though, that the development in this space is rapid, so we have to remain open-minded to consider the use cases blockchain technology can enable in the coming years as it continues to mature. In fact, just last week, Ethereum, one of the largest, most used blockchains, shifted to a completely new consensus mechanism and reduced its energy usage by over 99%. So we shouldn't dismiss the technology as a whole based on the faults or roadblocks that may not exist in a few years. At the same time, it's important to note that blockchain is not a panacea, and identifying the areas where it can have the most impact within the region is an important step. Next slide, please. So with the relatively recent increase in power sector complexity comes a need for greater intelligence and transparency via new digital tools. Surging numbers of distributed energy resources and smart devices coming online are generating vast amounts of granular data. It's an important fuel for burgeoning technologies such as AI to increase the efficiency of power systems and reduce energy usage. New means of managing all of this data in a secure, efficient, and transparent manner are being sought, and blockchain technology is already providing useful tools. So new business models in the energy sector enabled by blockchain continue to emerge and evolve, and some promising use cases include decentralized project finance, peer-to-peer power trading, increased transparency and traceability of the power sector, for example, allowing EV owners to charge their vehicles with renewables, for example, energy attribute issuance and trade, as well as others, and we'll hear more about these next. So rather than looking at blockchain and other emerging technologies as disruptions in the energy sector, it may be more accurate to look at them as solutions to the disruptions already taking place, namely the decentralization and decarbonization of energy. I know Sam will dig into this a bit in his presentation. So a lot of the text we see out there tends to focus on the details of technology instead of the use cases which can be enabled by blockchain technology. So I would guess most of us on this call aren't familiar with the technical details of how the Uber application works on our phones, but we know when we click a button, we can reserve a car without having to learn about TCP/IP or the underpinnings of Web 2. This is why we are here today and having this event, and we have assembled experts who are actually getting their hands dirty in Web 3 to give us tangible examples of how blockchain is already being used around the world to accelerate the energy transition and how we can apply these insights in the Arab region. Next slide, please. So to wrap up, a bit of regional context to provide some background on the challenges we need to solve in the Arab region. Sustainable energy development is a critical priority for all Arab countries. The Arab region is falling short in achieving SDG 7, entailing reduced social, economic, and environmental outcomes for its residents by 2030, without course correction. Renewable energy plays a marginal role in the Arab region's energy consumption, reflecting the region's globally unparalleled reliance on fossil fuel sources. In 2019, renewable energy, including biomass, accounted for less than 5% of the region's total final energy consumption. Next slide, please. So finally, before I hand over to Radia, implementation of blockchain technology within the Arab region is largely confined to developed urban areas such as Dubai. Interest in cryptocurrency mining and trading has surged in countries like Lebanon, where the devaluation of local currency has pushed people to use these emerging digital assets as a store of value and medium of exchange. But in terms of the energy sector use cases, such as project finance, energy trading, grid management, action in the Arab region remains somewhat minimal. So in terms of enabling environment, we've identified some key areas. When it comes to policies and regulatory requirements, the region may need regulation and a supervisory role for promoting safe, efficient, and cost-effective electricity transmission and exchange at the country and regional level, promotion of decentralized generation, regulation for interaction of new blockchain-based trading, and the evolution of existing electricity trading regulations. So I'll stop here, but I look forward to the panel discussion where our experts from the region will build on these challenges and use cases. So thank you very much, and over to you, Radia.
Thank you very much, Sean. And I think we'll return back to the regional perspective and how we can learn from the case study that will be presented. And that's why allow me to start with the first presenter, Mr. Sam Harnett, who is the Director of Product Marketing Energy Web. And he has really, and his institution has a very interesting experience in the field. And I think globally, more than 25 countries where you've been operating. If you can tell us more about the expertise and the work that your institution is doing in terms of blockchain, and specifically how link that to renewable energy uptake. Thank you. Over to you, Sam, and if you can please share your screen and your presentation.
Great, thank you for the introduction, Radia, and thank you again for the opportunity to present to you all today and participate in the panel. As Radia mentioned, I'm the Director of Product Marketing at Energy Web, and we are a global nonprofit incorporated in 2017. We're based in Switzerland, but we have a globally distributed team with teammates in roughly 20 countries. And as a nonprofit, we're a member-driven organization, so we work with over 50 large energy companies and technology vendors and project developers in the energy space around the world to build open source, decentralized technologies, including blockchain, that help these companies create business value from clean and distributed energy resources. And in the presentation today, I'm just going to speak a little bit more about our work specifically as it relates to leveraging blockchain and our technology stack to help increase the utilization of distributed energy resources to help create value for both customers and owners of distributed energy, as well as the regional grids in which they operate. So first, just a bit of background. For those that follow the energy transition, perhaps this is not news, but if you haven't been paying as close of attention, it might come as a surprise to learn that over the last few decades, and really the 2010s in particular, the costs of technologies like solar PV and battery storage have been falling at a pretty dramatic pace at an annualized rate of roughly 10% in different geographies. And those cost declines are projected to increase into the future, so that we're looking at, even as we've seen in the case of solar, almost 70% cost reductions over the last decade, looking ahead to things like batteries, that will continue to decline by as much as half or more in the coming decade. And then you factor in things like electric vehicles, smart thermostats, heat pumps, and other types of assets that can more intelligently modulate their electricity consumption based on grid conditions. And the net result is a significant increase in the ratio of distributed energy resources within countries all over the world. What I find really interesting about this trend is that it is happening pretty universally, really driven as a consumer adoption of new technology rather than a top-down, centrally planned initiative. And it happens in a wide range of countries and geographies with many different types of market structures and energy regulatory regimes. But in aggregate, we're expecting and already seeing that distributed energy is comprising a significant share of the total amount of generation capacity in countries. And so this is really creating both new opportunities and challenges for grid operators. To start with the good news, while individual DERs or distributed energy resources are generally inconsequential to grid operations, in aggregate, as we just saw, they can comprise a significant share, or in some cases, a majority of total supply at any given time or throughout the year. So this represents an enormous, low-cost, clean energy resource that can help customers and DER owners lower their carbon footprint, lower their electricity bills, and provide more reliable and resilient energy supply. DERs can also provide different types of grid services to both regional grids through mechanisms like wholesale markets. They can provide local services like voltage management and support through either exporting power to the grid or modulating the consumption profile of buildings. And so this is giving customers access to many, many different types of resources that can turn their homes or businesses or factories into self-contained grids or miniature power plants. But the challenge with this is that this introduces quite a lot of complexity for grid operators and utilities. So in any given region, we might expect to see on the order of thousands to many millions of individual DER assets. And as I mentioned, these are inherently diverse. Not only do they span many different types of resources from battery storage or distributed generation, electric vehicles, things like that, but even within each of those categories, there are many different manufacturers and different types of hardware that need to be incorporated into the grid. So to do that, there are different types of companies such as aggregators or even the DER manufacturers themselves that can play an active role in helping bundle those DERs into portfolios and then provide them as a cohesive resource to both distribution utilities and transmission operators or wholesale market operators. But the challenge there is that now this is introducing just an enormous increase in the amount of data and information that needs to be exchanged between all of these stakeholders in order to ensure that DERs actually can provide a net benefit and don't simply overwhelm local distribution networks or exacerbate other problems on the grid. And so this is where the role of software and information technology is really critical. But today, we're actually seeing history repeat itself in kind of an interesting way. And I like to use the analogy of how early power grids developed here in the US. So in the 19th century, before we adopted public utilities, private companies would essentially compete with each other to win new customers by developing their own proprietary distribution networks between generators and customer facilities. And they varied widely in terms of how they were built, what voltage, what current, and the resulting grid wasn't really one grid, but kind of a tangled web of competing grids that was incredibly inefficient and sometimes hazardous. And what was interesting here is that although it made sense from an individual bilateral perspective between a power distributor and a customer to create those bilateral connections, at a system level, it just really wasn't feasible to enable the kind of electrification that was ultimately beneficial to society. And so this idea of a public utility and consolidating the responsibility of building, owning, and operating that physical infrastructure really took hold, and that led to the eventual reforms that created public utilities and regulated grid operators that we see today. So how is history repeating itself in the IT landscape for DER management? Today, there are essentially a very heterogeneous mix of technologies being used by all of these different stakeholders. And in these markets, we're seeing individual platforms and protocols being cobbled together through point-to-point integrations between different stakeholders like transmission utilities, distribution utilities, aggregators, retailers, and DERs themselves. And so this is again kind of creating this web of technologies that are interdependent and interrelated, but often siloed and managed and administered completely separately. So the logic that could apply almost a century ago to consolidate the management of physical infrastructure into a regulated entity like a utility could be applied today to help consolidate alignment of industry around a single platform or protocol. But the IT world isn't really a perfect analogy here, because where it's quite easy to differentiate between a transmission network and a distribution network, and then the customer relationship itself, in the IT world, it kind of spans all of those domains. And so the questions become almost not just technical, but almost political and operational as well. So who would be responsible for administering this type of digital infrastructure that spans all of these different domains? And so our approach at EnergyWeb is to actually use decentralized technology where all of these different participants can independently host and run software that performs some of these data exchange and data validation processes using blockchain technology as a base to create the shared industry digital infrastructure in which each participant can connect to a single system rather than having to maintain many different point-to-point connections with peers and other participants, and then use that one system to facilitate communication and data validation processes across all of those different domains. And so to give just a very quick rundown of the architecture, we work on building these shared distributed energy resource data hubs in which different DER owners or aggregators can enroll these assets into this shared hub using self-sovereign identity technology, which is technology that allows for any different type of hardware or software to create a standardized and kind of portable identity that can be used within the system. And then all of the different utility stakeholders within our given region can integrate with that data hub, and then use the identity and attribute data to start to establish relationships between those different assets, aggregators, and customers, and then ultimately use that shared digital infrastructure as the basis to inform DER participation in different grid services at the wholesale level, at the network level, and within the customer side as well. So I know it's quite a lot to get there in 5 minutes, but I hope that's a good overview. And Radia, I will turn it back to you. I'll offer my contact information here and look forward to discussing more in the panel.
Thank you very much, Sam, for the useful presentation. In any case, we return back to you. And from the distributed energy resource management and trade to the energy attribute certificate and trade. So I would like to give the floor to Ms. Brianna Wells. She is the co-founder and CEO of Renewium Institute. Brianna, if you can put your video on, and if you can share your screen from your computer. Over to you, Brianna.
Thank you. I think you need to give me authorization to start my video, though.
I think this, can you check now? Yes.
All right, I think I'm here now.
Yeah,
Can you see me?
perfect. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen.
Yeah, it's visible. Just we'll put it in the touch format. Yeah, perfect.
All right. Okay, so thank you very much for having me. I'm really honored to be here. I've actually known Sean for a long time, so it's really exciting to come full circle. For context, my name is Brianna Welsh. I'm co-founder of Renewium Institute. High level, Renewium is a marketplace to fund climate solutions via a natural capital-backed token. So as a form of climate finance, Renewium issues digital tokens via the blockchain, representing what's known as the environmental benefit or the greenness associated with production of green energy that project owners, so mostly renewable energy for now, can sell for revenue, additional revenue on top of the underlying electricity that they sell, almost like a positive subsidy, if you will. So traditionally in this market, buyers would be corporate companies who are managing their ESG emissions management or footprint, and they would purchase these instruments for offsetting of their scope 2 emissions, so the greenness. But we are opening this market up to individuals as well, allowing both companies and individuals to participate in direct climate action. They receive a verified green receipt in the form of a blockchain-based token called a non-fungible token, which is proving their contribution to the causes, the underlying causes. So Renewium is initially beginning with the energy transition, as I mentioned, so funding renewables exclusively for our first token launch. But long-term, we'll be opening up the marketplace to different forms of natural capital. So for those not familiar, natural capital would be, a carbon offset is a form of natural capital. There are many forms, and a renewable energy certificate, which is the instrument that we work with, is another form. So this is a snapshot from our marketplace where you can actually participate actively. At the moment, we're just about to launch the token in a few months, but just to unpack a little bit about how we work. So Renewium partners with and vets renewable energy producers around the world, primarily solar and wind farms, although other forms of renewables as well. Once we verify that they have produced quality green energy, we issue them tokens via the blockchain that they can then sell on our marketplace. It's sort of a mechanism to price and trade the natural capital. Again, based on the legacy instrument, which is traded over the counter via brokers called a renewable energy certificate, parallel to carbon markets, and again, used either in tandem with an offset to manage the entire emissions chain for ESG of a company traditionally, or can be purchased independently by an individual or company. So what Renewium innovates on a little bit is creating this verified green certificate we mentioned. So there is no global recognizable label for the green economy. So if you think of fair trade or LEED certification, I'm sure many of you are familiar with both of those, and many other industries have similar labels. There isn't one for participating in green energy. So we are creating that the first movement, the first recognizable green label. And we do that by issuing an NFT that's a polar bear that represents the verified green or proof of commitment, proof of impact. So we also are creating an entire ecosystem around the green economy. So one of the benefits of blockchain, which I can touch on in a little bit, is its ability to integrate a community and to get its users participating in movements and in commercial decisions and in long-term strategic outcomes. And so we issue to our token holders voting rights on different climate causes that we sponsor and contribute to. They can take key commercial decisions, and they can earn rewards to kind of gamify the whole system so that more and more people are encouraged to participate and to ultimately fund more green energy. So if you think of us kind of like a crowdfunding platform for climate projects owned and operated by its funders, offering green participation rewards to evidence, contribution. So long-term, the goal is really to mobilize, a wall of money to renewable energy, and then eventually to all kinds of climate causes around the world, and give companies and citizens an opportunity to take part. So this is just a little bit more about us. I'm sure you're asking, why are you not doing carbon offsets? Why are you focusing on renewable energy specifically? High level, fossil fuel energy consumption directly accounts for about 1/3 of global emissions, and indirectly about 80% in productions of goods and services worldwide through fossil fuels. So the energy transition is one of, if not the most impactful and most straightforward, actually, lever we can pull in climate solutions and accelerating, the transition. So we opted to start with renewables for that reason. We also need about $4 trillion a year invested into renewables in order to reach our net zero targets between now and 2030. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with these numbers, but renewable projects are very financially disadvantaged compared to fossil fuels still, due to systemic reduction in costs that Sam just mentioned, which is awesome for the deployment of renewables worldwide. It's less great for the producers and the investors. Basically, the economics from an investment perspective are actually not as great as they were before when they cost more to build them. And so long term, you were seeing less attraction in terms of the climate finance to renewable energy, particularly in emerging markets. And we need emerging markets. So in the MENA region in particular, we need about 7 times the investment that we have currently driving into renewables in order to reach that energy transition. And when you think of what's happening right now, fossil fuels versus renewables, we're spending about $6 trillion a year in both explicit and implicit subsidies for fossil fuels globally, which is, if you do the math, about $11 million every minute. Renewable energy has about 400 billion. So it's less than 10% of the subsidies of fossil fuels. So just that alone makes fossil fuels more attractive for a lot of developers around the world, which means the market suffers ultimately. You know, a lot of the world is still in a capital mindset, and as long as we have fiduciary responsibility and investors have their own LPs to respond to, this is just the market that we're in. And so we need to make renewables more attractive to develop and more financially viable. So ultimately, the renewable energy certificate or an environmental attribute certificate, they're both called the same thing, which is the instrument we work on, is an opportunity to redirect capital and to fund renewable energy deployment, whether it's making existing operations more profitable or funding brand new ones from scratch. So I think moving on, you know, the challenge that we have in the market with the carbon offset space, which as I said, I'm sure many of you are familiar with, is that it's very complicated to quantify the material advantage to the environment of different types of natural capital. So understanding exactly how much carbon is sequestered by planting trees is actually not that difficult to mathematically compute, but then to ensure that that actually stays in the tree stays in the ground for, you know, the 30-year duration that is needed in order for it to actually sequester the carbon becomes a really big challenge. And so carbon offsets have suffered over the last 30 years since their inception at the Earth Summit in Rio 92 with, you know, a lot of, I'll say, you know, calculation concerns and reputational issues and trust issues. And the renewable energy certificate market, or the environmental attribute certificate market, is another alternative, but a much easier one to compute and to monitor, because most of renewable energy is being powered into usually a country's grid, or at least a public entity's grid. And therefore, it's quite easy to operate or to monitor operations. So Renewium can plug in directly to the operating system, what's called a SCADA of a renewable energy plant, and it can ensure that the data that we're monitoring and that we're issuing tokens on behalf of is quite verifiable. It's a very easy system to monitor. So that reliability and that trust that comes in the renewable energy space that doesn't happen as easily in the carbon space makes it one of the, in my opinion, one of the better sources or better options for climate finance around the world. I think in terms of understanding a little bit more, maybe I'll just move on to understanding, you know, why blockchain is necessary specifically for this market. I think a lot of questions happen. You know, why can't you just use a centralized register or ledger? You know, why do you need to decentralize and build on this technology? Ultimately, you know, the short answer is that these markets have been around for 30 odd years, and they're really not totally working. There's a lot of trust issues, as I mentioned. There's a lot of inefficiencies and stagnancy of capital and supply and demand issues, you know, kind of matchmaking problems. So blockchain is actually uniquely suited to reorient the market. So from a user perspective, blockchain doesn't really change a whole lot other than making a global marketplace available, which is a higher user experience. I'll say a better user experience. But it can bypass a lot of the bottlenecks that come with kind of centralized systems. Effectively, what we did with Renewium is we went back to first principles when we created the instrument the token instrument we have. And we said, you know, what is the objective of this market? The objective is to redirect or reappropriate capital from companies mostly, but also individuals who benefit from, you know, the externalities of advanced economies and energy consumption and fossil fuels, but don't have the ability right now, mostly economically, in order to transition meaningfully into being powered by renewables. If you think of a cement company or a steel company, they can't do that right now without dramatically altering their business models or probably killing their entire company. And so this is an opportunity for them to basically contribute into this space and to fund a good project, a renewable energy project around the world, or another type of climate solution, and support the overall economy, but do it in a way that gives them a bit of time to update their systems, basically. So how can we do that with the blockchain? What I mentioned was Renewium plugs in directly to the monitoring system of renewable energy plants. We transmit data directly to our blockchain system, which on demand in real time monitors the energy output, calculates it, and issues tokens 1-to-1 for megawatt hours of renewable energy produced. And those producers then are able to sell on our marketplace automatically. Now, what happens is that the open source software automatically certifies and kind of disintermediates some of the interdependencies, the individuals in the middle of that transaction process. So what we use automated smart contracts to direct the tokens and to direct the capital, meaning that everything is built on chain. So both buyers and sellers can actually see the entire provenance of history of that renewable energy project. So if a buyer, for example, wanted to know exactly where that project comes from, which country it's in, which year the megawatt hours were generated in, the timestamp, all of the data is included in what's called the metadata of the token. This doesn't exist in legacy markets. So you get the entire history of where that token has been and who earned it and where the money is going, and it's all done publicly on chain. So, much like what you see in traditional philanthropy, where, we have challenges of understanding exactly where the funding is going, with Renewium and with the blockchain in general, it's just really not unique to Renewium specifically, but all money transactions can be traced directly to who is buying and selling. So that allows for what we call a trustless solution, which means that individuals who buy our token or companies who buy the token don't actually have to trust Renewium that we've done our job in terms of vetting or verifying, nor do they have to trust that we've done our job in terms of sending the funds where it's meant to be. They can actually fact check us quite easily. So that's a big innovation for this space in terms of advancing the overall trust and reliability. It also allows for interoperability, which means that we can partner with all kinds of different companies who transact these sorts of instruments around the world quite seamlessly. We can just kind of API our token into their platforms and open up a much broader marketplace that has not historically existed. So when you think of the supply and demand issues that we have in legacy markets, blockchain is, uniquely suited to supersede that and to kind of innovate and create a really integrated, uniform market. So I don't know if there's any other questions on that specifically, but I can answer anything else after that. But I just wanted to kind of close with, I think renewable energy funding on the blockchain was one of the biggest and most important, I think, applications of blockchain technology specifically. And, all the other companies who are working here are talking about different applications of the tool. It's really limitless in terms of what blockchain can do. But I believe, and I think, us at Renewium, we believe that using it for funding and for kind of bypassing slower systems in terms of directing climate finance where it needs to be is one of the most important opportunities in the space.
Thank you very much, Brianna, for shedding the light on the climate finance, the need for finance on renewable energy versus fossil fuels, but at the same time, how blockchain can address the inefficiency on the illegal markets. We'll turn back to that, but we need to hear from Terry Matthew, who is the co-founder Theo by Engie, who will tell us and give us the example of a case study on a decentralized solar project finance and energy transparency platform. Terry, the floor is yours, and you can share your screen, please.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, perfectly. Just put your slide on full screen, please.
This is not the case?
Yeah, just display it on the biggest screen. Just on the data show display on the bottom of the screen.
Yeah,
Yes. Just
for me, it's full screen.
We share the wrong window.
at the wrong window.
It's to share the full screen.
Just make full sharing the screen, or we can do it. But it's okay. You can start, Terry. It's fine from our
Okay.
side. It's okay.
So hello, everyone. So my name is Thierry Mathieu. I'm based in Brussels. I'm the CEO of TEO, TEO for The Energy Origin. It's a startup backed by Engie. Engie is a big utility based in France and Belgium, and with international footprint. I will just scratch the surface of two use cases about energy and blockchain. Thanks to Brianna and Sam, they have already explained a lot about the energy sector, what is the move, and what about certification. What are the needs? So I will be very quick, and I hope we can discuss that later on in on the table. So the first use case is traceability. So we have started this initiative 4 years ago, and we started with green power. So as mentioned by Brianna, it's a big issue to be able to prove that you are consuming green power, and to be able to promote the consumption of decarbonized electricity. What we built is a platform where we will match your consumption as a end user of green power and identified green power assets. We can do that on a 24/7 basis, meaning that we will generate some certificates and proof of consumption that will be registered into the blockchain. So we have a live product. We have many customers using this solution, where they can connect, see their different plants and how they are fed with green power. They can on the platform collect all information about what was the asset used, where it's located, to make things as tangible as possible. And on the other side, getting some certificates registered into the blockchain to be able to prove that there is no greenwashing. So that's the first application that we have launched. We are using the Energy Web Foundation blockchain. So happy to see Sam today on the table. And that was the first application on this blockchain. We then moved to another energy, important energy layer, which is gas, natural gas, where we have adapted the platform to be able to give some certificates of origin. Something which is not really known is that the way you produce natural gas, you extract it, you transport it, has a huge impact in terms of CO2. So it's not only the gas that you collect at the end that will emit some CO2 when you burn that. It's all the chain, the value chain, or the transportation chain that will emit some CO2. So what we built is the ability for producer or midstreamer in the gas market to be able to certify where was the gas produced and with which impact. So we will generate some certificates, again, registered into the blockchain, where all the consumer and all the supply chain will be able to connect and collect this information, and then we'll be able to prove that this gas has been produced with this level of emissions, meaning that for their CSR reporting, they can use this value and not an average value as it is done today by most of the big gas consumer. So that was the second big product. We have some customer, it's live and up and running. I will stop here. So that's the product we built with TO. And I will be happy to discuss more in details if you have questions. So I keep 2 minutes to discuss about a second application, which is what? Not.
You need to scroll down the slides. Yeah.
Yes, I have an issue. I'm not on the good.
No, because it's not a big issue, because when you shared it, it was like slide, not on a bigger screen. That's why.
Okay. It was not the good, sorry.
No problem, but we were able to follow.
I hope now that you see the good slide.
Yes, the confounded solar energy. Yes.
Cool. In full screen?
Yeah, perfect, perfect. Yeah.
Okay, so that's another use case which was developed together by NG Energy Access and Energy Web, colleagues of Sam. So the idea here is really to test how we could leverage on the blockchain technology in order to fund some solar panels in African countries in this case. So a first pilot has been launched. A first amount of $100,000 has been injected. The idea is to use the Energy Web token, so the token on from the Energy Web chain, to fund this these panels. So for the pilot, we did something simple. We use we asked for people to lock their token. So if you hold this kind of token, you have the ability to lock them for a certain period of time. In exchange, you will receive a 10% return with 10% token extra at the end of the period. And then for the proof of concept, this token were sold, made dollars. Then we bought some PV panels, install them, and then offer them to the people locally so they can pay to use as it's the usage in Africa. And at the end, the owner of EWT, who have crowdfunded the solar panels, will be reimbursed and will receive back their tokens plus a 10% increase. The idea is to solve one issue, which is the risk of change, and also not to use banks in between to do all the structuration, because it's taking too much money out of the table. And the idea is really to, at the end, to do every transaction into Energy Web token. That's really the goal. So to avoid any friction and to ease for people in European countries, they can easily invest into some panels. And the future would be to have this token as soon as there is a wallet attached to a virtual wallet attached to a specific panels. All the life of the panel, yes, the solar panel will be attached to this. So it will be funded, it will be bought, it will be used and paid back by using the electricity produced. And then the financer, that can be just one guy in Europe, will be reimbursed. So it's another blockchain application that is tested by NG and the Energy Web to ease and use some crypto new way of funding. And there are many people holding these tokens that are happy to put them and have a return in front of that. So that's the beginning, and it's just a pilot. But as mentioned by Brianna, it's really important way to fund this growing need that we have to develop renewable energy. I will stop there, and maybe we can have a discussion, and maybe I can come back also on the traceability tool that we built on top of blockchain. I did not go into details for why blockchain. I think Sam and Brianna have done that well, but we can answer questions.
Thank you very much, Terry. And we'll have also later on a question for you on how really important to see the traceability through the blockchain and from production to consumption and what we consume versus what we produce. And thank you for sharing the case study in Africa. I would like then to take advantage of having all speakers here and the experts also to listen from the Arab regional perspective. To call you upon all the panels, if you can put your video on, but you remain muted, to start the panel discussion. But before asking the questions as a follow-up questions for the speakers, I would like to hear from Lebanon and from Jessica, who also is an expert in the Arab region, and she is a resident scholar at the Middle East Institute and also consultant who work on implementing a renewable energy project in the region. From your perspective, Jessica, how you see that blockchain uses in cases do you think that could have the most impact in the Arab region to increase the share of renewable energy and obviously expand the access in the rural community where you had the opportunity to work? Over to you, Jessica.
Thank you, Raja. I also want to flag that a key importance of blockchain users is putting people at the heart of the energy transition, which has been lagging in other energy systems in the region. So this enables customers to become active players and part of the transition process and feel engaged and some sort of ownership. I will draw on some of the discussion that has been done also, and say it's that in order to deduce the major applications and benefits of blockchain in the region, it's important to look at some of the challenges that we're facing with energy transition in Arab states, especially within rural areas, as you mentioned. So we have an inability to attract financing, high losses, centralized inefficient systems, lack of data, and in so many places, political instability. So blockchain allows for this data collection, making system more efficient, better distribution of electricity, improves efficiency, and reduces losses since we can trace that energy. It promotes decentralization, which is going to be a very important model in achieving the ambitious targets we've set for renewable energy in the region. We need a lot of innovation and job creation, especially with this economy, which also blockchain enables, and the financing. So some of the applications are, of course, peer-to-peer electricity using smart contract, real-time electricity trade between neighbors, but that's also very important for microgrids in terms of peer-to-peer arrangement, shared ownership. We know that despite that many countries in the region are 100% electrified, we still struggle with access to electricity, especially in rural areas. And so we have a very high level of dependence on diesel generators, which is not only polluting, but also very expensive electricity. So blockchain can also enable this price reduction, since we're going to increase technology deployment, but also fair competition and boosting this competition. Microgrids through smart meters to tokenize this energy, enabling residents to trade between each other green electricity, enabling community solars and others. Along with smart contracts and smart meters, we can improve the distribution of electricity and grid efficiency. Another important application I need to flag, since we have so many conflict and post-conflict areas in the region, is the utilization of blockchain as a vehicle for making more efficient humanitarian aid and development aid assistance in these conflict areas, enabling better distribution of donations and grants, lowering maybe overhead costs, and ensuring that whatever intervention is being designed and implemented actually meets the local community needs. And lastly, all these third-party platforms, innovation is going to be very important for youth and entrepreneurship in the region.
Thanks, Jessica, for indicating some of the applications of blockchain, and if not too many, specifically in the Arab regional context and rural context. And I think obviously this falls perfectly with what was highlighted by the previous presentation on examples in an African continent. But certainly some of the challenges are similar to those that are somehow framing in terms of accelerating the uptake of renewable energy. And that's why I would like to hear from Jordan, and I would like to then move to Samer Zuwaida, who is an expert in electrical engineering, implementing field project, and also he's a lecturer at Hussein Technical University in Jordan. Samer, from your perspective, and having listened to eminent speakers on the different perspective in terms of looking how blockchain can help enabling the just transition, and while Jessica indicated the different applications that we can have and how a blockchain can help to open up the possibilities to adjust the energy access and uptake of renewable energy. So from your perspective, how you see the key barriers for the implementation of the case that is presented, and how we can specifically in the Arab region look at it from, would it be this mostly other policy or access to technology or awareness? How you see it from your views? Over to you, Sam.
Thank you very much, Ms. Radia, for this fantastic opportunity to speak about blockchain. Definitely depends on the market. So there is a, let's say, in the Arab region, in MENA region, there are different markets. And specifically when we are talking about the Jordanian market, Jordanian market is pretty mature regarding renewable energy. We are at 29% renewable energy electricity. So we are transitioning into the next stage, next 5 to 10 years, and this is very important to digitize. So we are moving into the, let's say, the smart grid, which we are starting with the smart meters and the data management. So in the past, we were talking about the power sector. Now we're talking about the power sector plus the communication sector, data management, and the cybersecurity. So these present a lot of challenges because the power sector has regulations, laws, bylaws, and instructions, and the data management and the communication sector has also bylaws and data management, and the cybersecurity is pretty new. So right now, the power sector is not recognized as an NCI, National Critical Infrastructure. So it has to be recognized as a national critical infrastructure for the data management to take place and be secured and have the cybersecurity oversee all the operations. So we do need in the future to have the option to run the blockchain technology, to use the blockchain technology, because we have different kind of customers. So we have, let's say, the customers who are currently covering 100% of their electricity needs. So 40% to 50% of this energy is directly consumed by them, and 50% is fed to the grid. So this energy fed to the grid currently is being let's say, used by the grid for other consumers. And here, it's an opportunity for the DSOs, the distribution companies, to develop a platform for sharing this energy with other customers. So we have to do a lot of capacity building. We have to do a lot of development in the regulations, and this will take to maybe, I would say, between 2 to 4 years. And the development of infrastructure, because we're talking about a communication network, and we're talking about the cybersecurity network. So all of these must be developed. I'm talking about the Jordan case. So the access to technology is important, but it depends on the technology and the cost of technology. So right now, I would say in 2022 is the base year for storage, the lithium-ion storage. So we're working rigorously in Jordan to develop this storage regulations and the code or storage code to connect to grid at the distribution and the transmission level. So there are plenty of opportunities. I would say there are, let's say, pilot projects in Jordan. So during the past 10 years, we had the Syrian refugee crisis, and we had a bare piece of land where we had to integrate 200,000 refugees, visitors in that. So the UN developed a program using blockchain and iris scanners. So the UNHCR eliminated all international banks and eliminated all local banks and directly transferred funds to the refugees. So these refugees, they had the monthly allowance to spend on groceries, let's say $50 to $100. And they were using the iris scanner, and that built the credibility, built the credit for the refugees. So that gave a lot of information about the behavior of these new visitors. But all the system was not open, it was controlled system. So it was monitored and all the information registered. So it's not pretty much what we call the, let's say, open system and rigorous, let's say, the idea behind the blockchain, but this was a controlled system. So I think in the future, we will see new technologies, we will see the blockchain technology, and we will have like a smart contract between the prosumers and the consumers. So the prosumer will have more energy, and they will generate the energy that they need. And once they have the excess energy, they will offer it in the market. And then you will have the buyers putting their bids, and the best bid will be selected and awarded, and then the transaction finalized using the blockchain and the transfer of funds. So all of this will require new regulations. And I believe the DSOs will continue because maintaining the grid is more important than selling electricity. So it's very difficult for consumers to maintain the grid integrity of the grid. So the DSOs will continue doing their job, maintaining the service of providing electricity 24/7, 365, and then using the blockchain to develop new opportunities for prosumers and let's say solving the grid problems like the excess energy during the day, and developing demand side management programs. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Samuel, for shedding the light on the need for capacity building, but more importantly, actually, when you speak about the energy transition and the need for investment in the infrastructure, that remain a bigger challenge. We do have several questions on the chat box as we speak, and some of them, I believe, some of you already, of the panelists already started responding to them. But if I may take, give one of the question, starting by one of them to the panelists, and then in the meantime, we can take all the questions from the chat box. Actually, one of the questions, since we shared a case of application of blockchains, And we certainly value its added to the enabling the just energy transition and the protection in the Arab region despite the challenges. But there are other challenges that we see them from the company's perspective, and maybe some of them who are already investing whether in the technologies or on renewable energy technologies or combination of both. So my question is to Sam, what's you think are one or two major challenges, unique challenges that the companies or the enterprises would put them as on the top of the agenda when adopting and working in such business?
Yeah, it's a great question, and something we have quite a lot of experience with. As I think somebody in the chat has mentioned, right? We've done dozens of projects with companies in many different countries and types of use cases. And I think as a general theme, though, even though those are quite diverse, working with large companies, I think before even getting to the technology, there's sometimes a question of what is kind of the business objective or business value of some new product or solution, and then asking the question, is blockchain technology the best fit to achieve that goal? And sometimes if you're working within innovation departments or parts of organizations that are really forward thinking, they're quite excited to learn and adopt new technologies. And then you get into the core part of the business, and the mindset is a bit different. And especially if you're introducing something new, having to explain some of the unique attributes and features of, let's say, blockchain versus conventional technologies can sometimes kind of hinder progress, because you have to first get buy-in about an idea about using blockchain technology in order to support that business case. The other one is that companies generally have very strict and robust IT and cybersecurity policies and practices, and they're really all based around kind of legacy technologies and service providers. And a lot of blockchain technologies don't fit neatly within those frameworks. And so things about, are you going to be hosting blockchain nodes in your existing IT perimeter? Are you going to allow connections to outside peers? Are you going to have members within your organization actually using things like private keys or sending blockchain transactions? And how do you do that? If you're going to be dealing with an application that involves cryptocurrencies or digital assets, even from a finance and accounting perspective, how do you deal with that? So there's a lot of, I'd say, capacity building and education that goes into it, but there's also an opportunity, I think, for organizations to abstract away some of those underlying details. I think Sean's point earlier about, you don't need to understand the underlying architecture of an app like Uber to get value. So the more that companies can leverage blockchain technologies while abstracting away some of those complexities, I think that will help overcome some of those challenges with enterprise adoption.
Yeah, thank you very much. Maybe so we need much more matchmaking between the technology providers and the companies and the users, and that's why we would like to take one question from the chat box. So I have another one, Sean.
Sure, thank you. So maybe one question we can address now is, I think Aya M asked, what are the timelines for blockchain implementation, maybe specific to the region? Will it be in the next 5 to 10 years that we see use cases adopted here? And maybe someone who can answer this is Thierry, since you sort of talked about the project finance, but also the traceability and transparency. So in your view, having done this pilot project in Africa, on what time scale can we start to implement these things for normal average consumers or businesses? If you can just talk a bit about that, Thierry.
Yeah, that's better unmuted. It can be quick. It really depends on the need. If you answer a need, then you have use cases are already deployed. It works. So for the use cases I know, if some big industrials need some traceability and some proof of consumption of renewable energies, if that makes sense, then use cases are ready and solutions are ready. So It's just a matter of is the market in need for such a transparency? Maybe on gas, it can be much quicker. It's something quite new, so it can, and there will be an impact in Arabic region for sure. So that could be in the coming months or next year, because things are moving quickly. And the last one, so I mentioned about the crowdfunding of decentralized solar panels. Maybe there is some funding for this kind of and the need right now to promote this kind of investment. So it's still a proof of concept, but it can be accelerated if there is some funding behind to start the pump. But maybe Sam, you also have an opinion on that, as you've seen Energy Web ecosystem moved quite a lot, and yes, maybe there are some barriers in some area, there are not in others.
Yeah, I'd say sometimes, the pace of progress is it's slow until it's fast, to kind of oversimplify. Like I was mentioning before, oftentimes you have a whole process of doing education and getting buy-in, scoping a use case, developing the hypotheses of how a blockchain solution can create business value for companies or for consumer value for customers. And that can be quite a long process. But then, as Thierry mentioned, when a decision is made, right, a lot of this technology is really starting to mature, and so the implementation can be quite quick. And so, yeah, I would tend to agree. Really, is there a particular use case, application, or market need for these types of solutions? And if yes, then I would expect certainly within a decade, if not much sooner, but it really ultimately depends on the, I'd say the real world value that these solutions can bring to either companies or consumers.
If I may, because we do have other questions in the chat box, you want to take one, Sean, or I can take the next question?
Go ahead, Rowdy, and then I'll check the chat box first.
Yes, so since we spoke about traceability and and as you said, Sam, that sometimes need to be accelerated in order to make progress, certainly. My question is to Brianna. Since you spoke about the attribute credits, I think we'll speak about the trading in the blockchain. From your perspective, what role do the energy attribute credit play in the stable energy transition? Specifically, there was one of your slides referring to fossil fuels versus renewables, and the challenge in terms of obviously moving to much more focus on the renewable energy, clean energy versus fossil fuel. But so how you see the role of energy attribute credit, please?
Thank you. I mean, much like the role of carbon offsets and actually all forms of natural capital, the objective of this market is to send a price signal to the developers of climate solutions. For energy attribute, it's specific to renewable energy, but natural capital is all kinds of climate solutions, to make it, one, more financially viable, obviously, to help the producers manage operating costs, to support them with reinvestment capital, to allow them to be more competitive when they bid to grids to actually get their energy on the grid. So in many markets, in order to have if you're a solar or wind farm or any kind of energy producer, you're bidding against other producers of different types of energy and of your own type of energy for access into the grid. Think of it like entering a highway that's congested. And oftentimes the grid operator or owner is a country whose interest is in serving its people and making sure that the energy that the consumers have is the lowest cost possible. That's their interest. And so it's in the best interest of the producer to bid at the lowest price, which, you know, makes sense for obviously all of us individuals and households. Again, as what I mentioned before, though, that means that they actually reduce their operating revenues dramatically if they do that. So when they become cost competitive, they actually become less financially viable as a business. And the problem with that is that sometimes fossil fuels are a better business to invest into. And investors they have fiduciary responsibility. They need to send returns to their shareholders, or they need to pay back the bank if they have debt or loans. It's just the way the economy works, right? And so what energy attribute certificates, as well as really all kinds of natural capital, can do uniquely is help to elevate profitability, to make it more long-term sustainable to build these projects. So it sends a price signal to investors and to developers that these build-outs are financially viable and that they can pay back their loans in a reasonable time. So that's a huge advantage to the industry. It also gives companies the opportunity to participate in the energy transition in a way that they can't necessarily directly when they're buying energy from a grid or in the local region they operate in. In many markets around the world, you can't buy renewable energy at all, and certainly not as a majority of the power that's being sent to the grid. And so companies who are powering their operations from the grid don't really have a choice. And if they want to participate in the energy transition because they believe in it, or because they have those values, or because their customers want it, or because, you know, that's the right thing to do long term, this is actually an opportunity for them to really engage in that marketplace for the first time, in many cases for the first time. So what we're seeing in the region specifically, actually, there's a lot of renewable energy, you know, in countries like Jordan and Morocco and in Egypt. We work with these markets, all three of those actually pretty closely. So, you know, we understand the mechanics of the cost benefit of the renewable market, and energy attributes really offer up to, you know, 15 or 20% more in terms of revenues, depending on obviously the price of the actual attribute itself. That really makes these businesses viable, you know, and so that's huge for developing new renewable energy and continuing to deploy and scale. So we see them as almost an integral feature in the market as we broaden around the world and as we deploy more renewables in regions like the Arab region.
Yeah, effective. But if I may contribute to the discussion, one of the key elements what you highlighted. Basically, in the Arab region, the major problem is that you still have the monopoly of the power sector by national companies, and whether be it for oil and gas producers or consumers alike. And the market structure with still regulated prices with subsidies doesn't really allow so far to really have a market, open market, which have to trade electricity or energy in a way that blockchain would have room to basically uptake. But I think one of the elements that where we have also this session is that because in areas where I think Jessica spoke about that, where you have whether in conflict or areas where the government institutions are not really able to provide the services of the current situation, then we have obviously a room for duplicating the example that Terry mentioned in African continent. And that's why I think we still have a question from the chat box, and I think one of them is addressed to Energy Web, where basically one of the participant, I think I am. She's saying that she's noticed that you do have several projects in different parts of the world, but none of them in the Arab region or Arab countries. So if there is something specifically in addition to what we said, make that the business case is not obviously adequate for your institution to work there. Over to you, Terry. Sorry, Sam.
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and a keen observation. I would say there's probably nothing inherent about a systematic barrier, let's say, to working in the Arab region. I know our Energy Web's director for the Europe and Middle East and Africa region has formerly done quite a lot of work on big power projects in places like Saudi Arabia and UAE, in Nigeria. And so, I know he has been working to try to identify opportunities to develop projects in the region. But I think it gets back a little bit to, what I had mentioned earlier, and Terry and Brianna have mentioned as well, is that, we have to not just think about the technology as a solution in and of itself, but what's the broader context. So there's, often an element of regulation and regulatory reform. Are there market opportunities for things like energy attribute certificates or distributed energy resources or electric mobility and things like that? There's also the kind of realities of the power systems in particular as they stand today. In the case of distributed energy resources, most of our work is concentrated in markets where the proliferation of DERs is already causing material impacts to grid operations today. And so it's no longer a future hypothetical in those areas. It's something that needs to be addressed more immediately. The one opportunity that's still quite new for EnergyWeb, but we're seeing some traction, and hopefully we'll be able to be making some announcements on projects in the future. But in the traceability space, looking at other types of fuels. So I know there's a lot of interest among some of our members around things like sustainable aviation fuel, which will draw carbon out of atmospheric sources and convert it into fuels that can be used in the aviation industry. And given the Arab region's expertise in liquid fuel production today, that's possibly an opportunity. Also things like green hydrogen, where renewable energy is being used in electrolyzers to produce hydrogen for other heavy industry, and some of the traceability and accounting there. I think those are still, again, not really specific to a blockchain or any software solution, but really those are also, that takes quite a lot of investment and physical capacity and a lot of capital to bring those products to market. But I think longer term, those are probably opportunities that may also be emerging in addition to some of the ones that we've talked about today.
Thank you very much, Sam. So maybe I would like also to hear from Terry, since we're very much like the example which I feel it's really fully a case of that can be applicable in the Arab region, specifically in the rural area, or countries in the least developed countries like those in Africa, Sudan, Mauritania, for example. So based on your work on crowdfunding solar project in Africa, how you see what are the enablers basically if you want to replicate the same, or your institution want to duplicate the same in countries or in this similar context in the African continent, or others in the Mashriq like Jordan and Lebanon?
Maybe I will just add on the previous question about what could change. And because blockchain is coming either for itself, so for cryptocurrency usage, transfer of value, but for other application for energy, you need first the deployment of the technology. So if we think about hydrogen, for instance, we have been speaking about hydrogen for a long time, but it's still not there in terms of volume. You have ammonia, green ammonia. You have many things are popping up everywhere, and I think especially in Arabia, you have many huge projects that will need some traceability, and so it will come with the activation of such projects or the final phase of implementation, and that's for the coming years, I think. So. All the use cases about traceability, I think, will be very useful in your area, and that's that will become a reality as soon as there is a physical reality to track. So that's just my point. And for your second question about what would be needed to deploy such initiative in Arabic region, I think first it's still a pilot that has been launched together with EnergyWeb, So it was a success in terms of people willing to bring their token and fund this solar panels and electricity access, decentralized electricity access. So that's the first feedback. But for now, there are other initiatives more without blockchain, trying to push some decentralized energy with bringing a backbone of network in a non-covered area, and on top of that, proposing to people to pay as you go, just for the electricity, to reimburse the small grid and to make it grow. So potentially we are too early in the stage of this pilot, which has been just launched a few months ago. But the idea would be to merge both initiatives, I think, in order to accelerate the expansion of access to energy. So I think there are no specific barriers or to adapt that in other countries, except I think I'm not the expert, I'm not fully involved in this topic, but I think the political support will be key to offer a scheme where you can build this kind of projects and fund them with this with the blockchain technology, using the same kind of solution that has been tested with Energy Web.
Merci, Thierry. And that's why, so let me follow up on that with Jessica. Jessica, the floor is yours. You are muted, Jessica, if you can unmute yourself.
Yes, I wanted to mention that some of the key cases that are already being implemented in the region are IRACs. So these certificates have been quite common in so many countries in the region. Dubai in the UAE adopted this issuance in 2017. Then we've seen Jordan, Egypt, Morocco, Oman, Saudi Arabia, and just a few months ago, in April 2022, Lebanon also has been approved for IRAC issuance. I tracked the IRAC official data. I have some figures here. We've seen that Egypt has had in the year 2021 a double increase in certificate issuance compared to 2020, but it remains a low number compared to the others in the region with 38,000 issuance. Jordan has maintained an almost constant issuance of an average 120,000 in 2020 and 2021, whereas the UAE has had a significant retraction of 75% from 2 million in 2020 to almost 600,000 in 2021. And Morocco has had 49,000 in 2020, but dropped to 18,000 in 2021. This could be an indication just because of the pandemic, but obviously this has been common in these countries in the region. And for Lebanon, we don't have data for IRACs. It's probably would be adopted more by corporates soon. But Lebanon has had some crowdfunding for renewable energy decentralized distribution through a platform called Zumal, with some UN project as well. So they developed Live Love Lebanon crowdfunding, where especially diaspora could fund some of the energy projects in Lebanon.
Thank you very much, Jessica. We couldn't actually close the session before hearing the tracking of what is going on in the region, and thanks for what you provide as an information. I would like then to see if we have an additional question on the chat box that we didn't address in a way or another through our conversation. Sean, if you can display and see if possible. I think we addressed most of them directly or indirectly. And basically, this is just, there's one question on who are the major providers of those technologies. Where we speak about blockchain, so it's we are speaking about different kind of technologies and interventions. I don't know if anyone would like to take this one before we take the wrap up of the takeaway of today's session. And thank you very much for the panelists and the speakers who responded to all the questions of that were addressed in the chat box, which will save them obviously.
I can take the
Yes,
question.
please. Yes, yes, please.
Very quickly, if you think blockchain, so blockchain technology is the blockchain behind Bitcoin. So it was the first usage of this technology. It's still many use cases are using blockchain of Bitcoin. You have also Ethereum, which is much more easier to use, which is the major one mentioned as in your introduction speech that changed from a proof of work, well, it's a technical word, to proof of stake. So reducing by 99% his impact in terms of CO2. This one is, you can use that to make some smart contracts, some programs that will run automatically. So that's the biggest one in terms of technology, but then you can copy paste what the energy web, for instance, blockchain is a copy paste in a way of with the same way of thinking that the Ethereum. So it's a Ethereum-like technology. So energy web can be seen as a provider of technology. They have developed a blockchain dedicated to the energy use cases, but you have hundreds, thousands of blockchain. Some of them are very largely used, like Ethereum. I think the energy web blockchain is also very used in terms of for use cases in the energy. And some, so you may do your own blockchain tomorrow, so just used by you. So this is difficult to answer this question. You have some new ideas, new developments, new type of blockchain technology, but you have really the main one today, I would say, is Ethereum. But maybe Sam, you want to comment also on that?
Yeah, I would say there are, as Thierry mentioned, there are many different underlying blockchain technologies. Obviously, Ethereum is one of them. There are other different types of platforms that provide that open source foundation, let's say, for building blockchain applications. Then there are also companies who will help with the actual customization and implementation of those technologies. And so you can think of kind of conventional large IT providers. IBM, for example, is very well known in doing work with a blockchain or distributed ledger technology called Hyperledger. You can go on places like Amazon Web Services or Azure, and they have blockchain as a service type offerings. As Energy Web, that's kind of our core model right now. We help with customization and implementation of the open source technologies and solutions. And then there are, dozens of, startups and companies who are actually building, full applications and solutions with blockchain and abstracting it away. So it's a difficult one to say who are the major providers, because it really is quite a diverse landscape.
Thank you very much. And I think as a starting look into the usage of blockchain, then basically we're just starting off really brainstorming around the enablers and more importantly, applicability in the context of the Arab region. And that's why I would like to give the floor to Sean, who been very kind to summarize some of the takeaway of today's session. If we can put them in on the screen, Sean, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Radia. So thanks to the moderator and our 5 experts for that lively discussion. I'll keep it quick since we're a bit over time. Just quickly, the sustainable energy transition is one of the most important opportunities for blockchain implementation, and we need to ensure that we are using the technology to place people at the heart of the energy transition. I think Jessica mentioned that, and I thought that was a poignant thing to mention. From Sam, we heard that DER adoption is accelerating and introducing new challenges, but also opportunities for grid operators to unlock the maximum value from DER. Grid operators need new tools to coordinate complex DER activity among many stakeholders. From Thierry, we heard about traceability and transparency via blockchain and how it's enabling consumers to be sure that the energy they consume is sustainable. And I think one of the interesting use cases for that is really the electric vehicle industry. If people driving these cars can be sure that they're charging via renewable energy using blockchain tools like this, I think that's quite an interesting use case. Decentralized project finance can now increase efficiencies and reduce risks for investors in terms of foreign transaction fees, and return on investment is another thing we heard from Angie. Next slide, please. Timelines depend on market readiness, and the technology is here in terms of traceability and decentralized project finance. The pace of progress is slow until it's fast. I think Sam mentioned that. I thought that was quite an interesting takeaway. Within the region, blockchain can address the inability to attract finances and collect data. We heard from Jessica. Regulations within the region are needed to create the enabling environment to accelerate blockchain adoption within the region, and lack of infrastructure is a key barrier, what we heard from Samer. Energy attribute credits give companies an opportunity to participate in the sustainable energy transition, even if they may not have access to renewable energy locally. And RECs offer additional revenue streams for these generators. We heard from Brianna, and IRECs already are being implemented in the region, and Lebanon has seen progress on decentralized project financing. And lastly, we just talked a bit about the different chains. We talked about Ethereum being a main blockchain when it comes to the public permissionless chains, and also Hyperledger Fabric. So there are many different blockchains. I think many of them are not going to be very well used for anything really, specifically in the energy sector. But one thing that we heard earlier is that we just need to keep an open mind and use these tools, and keep in mind and be cognizant of the fact that they will continue to develop, and just we need to grow as an industry along with these tools. It's not a panacea, but we can use them to reach our goals for a sustainable, inclusive energy transition within the region and also globally. So with that, I want to hand back over to our moderator for any closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Sean. Thank you for the excellent wrap up of the key takeaway of the session. Actually, I think this helped us basically to come up with at least some of the identify or confirm certain barriers that we already are aware of, certainly related to the capacity building, the awareness needed, but more importantly, the access to finance to invest in the key infrastructure, and how the integrated approach in looking how the different energy sources, be it hydrogen or renewable energy, be it on-grid or off-grid, and looking to the potential in the Arab region, diving from the case of Dubai, when we see it's mostly at the national level, to a decentralized system where we see it in the LDCs and countries in conflict, and those in the rural area where we really want to focus our report in the next step, which will be dedicated to see how blockchain can really help to accelerate the energy transition in a rural context, and specifically on looking to decentralized system and small-scale renewability technologies. And this would help on all the work that we are undertaking at the Regional Commission for Western Asia, look into the integrated approach that basically look into the social, economic, environmental aspect of the energy transition, but more importantly, look at from the climate change lens, and how with that we can attract more and disseminate and communicate the need to invest and attract the private sector, but at the same time address to the policymakers in order to provide the enabling environment as policy and regulations. And I think these are the major elements personally and the team have been learning today from the case study presented by the organizations eminent speakers. I would like to, on behalf of ESQA and my team, to thank the expert and speakers, starting thanks Sam, Brianna, and Terry for joining us today. Thanks Jessica and Samer for your support and in joining this conversation. And this is just the first webinar we are undertaking the framework of this work, and we will do a follow-up on that for the next step. Thank you very much for listening to us, and thanks for participation of all the participants that joined us today, whether virtual or in person at the UN House. Thank you very much. And let's just have one group photo, even virtually, with those who are online. We will send the link to the media coverage. I think it's also on YouTube and in Twitter. So this will be shared together with the presentations to the speakers, but also to the participants, and also the group photo. Thank you very much.